Today's video I'm going to do a brief review on the brand new Athearn Genesis Illinois Central GP50, which Illinois Central actually rebuilt into a GP40-3, and I'll talk about that in my video. This is a one-of-a-kind prototype. There was only one GP40-3 produced by the Illinois Central. The road number is 3140. This is the Black Death Star scheme with an Operation Lifesaver logo painted on the long hood of the locomotive. Just going to do a real brief unboxing here. I have not had this locomotive out of the packaging yet, so this is my first time taking a look at it. This is my first Athearn Genesis locomotive that actually includes some of the upgrades. This is not a Genesis 2 model that have been advertised by Athearn here recently. This is still the original Genesis line, but it does have some upgrades to it. Has the Tsunami 2 decoder, which has been out for quite some time, but it also has the LEDs, which Athearn was very slow to switch over from the incandescent bulbs to the LEDs, some rubber hoses and things of that nature. I always really like the Athearn packaging. It has a lot of information about the locomotive, about the prototype, the numbers that were produced. This particular locomotive has a pretty storied history that I'll talk about. This is new. This is the first time I've had one of these in one of my locomotives. Athearn usually just has a one-page handout or a one-page insert about the CV values and things like that, which now they've actually come to a full booklet. We'll get more into these here in just a minute when we start running the locomotive through its test. Again, very standard packaging. If you have an Athearn Genesis model, you know really what to expect in terms of what they do with their packaging. Very solid, stable within the package. Back piece flips out. There's obviously always some plastic associated with these models, but overall, very easy to get out of the package. I know everybody watches product review videos to actually see and hear the locomotive in action, so before I actually get into the details of this locomotive, we're going to go ahead and take it over and just do an initial startup sequence and run through the functions real quick, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about the prototype and also about some of the features on this Athearn model. So the prototype Illinois Central 3140 is actually still operational today in 2019. There are some pictures on the internet of this locomotive. I've been looking for it. We have a big Canadian National yard here in Waterloo, and this particular locomotive is still in existence in its black Illinois Central paint. It's been spotted along the Canadian National route. What's very interesting about this locomotive has a very storied history. It started its life as Chicago Northwestern road number 5051. It was a GP50 built in May of 1980. And it had a very somewhat tragic demise on May 5th, 1987. It was wrecked in Tama, Iowa, which is about 30 miles south of where I live. I'm intertwining some pictures of the wreckage. I've put a link in the video description if you want to go to the railroadpicturesarchive.net website. There are about a half a dozen, well, probably closer to a dozen pictures. It was a very spectacular accident. From 1987, when it was wrecked, Chicago Northwestern has a yard, or had a yard, up in Olwine, Iowa, which is about 50 to 60 miles away from here, north and east of Waterloo. And they stripped it down, took all the parts off of it that they could, and it sat pretty much stripped down in the yard up in Olwine. Somehow or another, and I wasn't able to figure out how the Illinois Central actually acquired this locomotive, but in 1997 it ended up going through a rebuilding process and it became Illinois Central number 3140. It was a one-off rebuild, and Illinois Central called it a GP40-3. Again, I couldn't find out why it was a GP40-3. They had a lot of GP40-2s. They did not have any GP50s on their roster, so that could be one of the reasons. But if anybody knows, please make a comment if you know any more of the history of this locomotive. So based on some of the prototype photos that are available online, when this one was rebuilt, it's very prototypically correct. There's no snowplow in the front. There is a pointed anti-climber on the front. Ditch lights mounted on the walk boards. P5. I guess I have to move it up here a little bit. Nathan P5 horn. Sinclair ice skate antenna. Just sort of look back a little bit. The rest of this looks very similar to a GP50. Does have dynamic brakes with a single fan above the dynamic brake duct. Spotting feature on a GP50 are the 3 radiator fans on the top of the long hood. Just continue quickly through. Again, deck mounted rear ditch lights, and on this model they are operational. Sight glass in for the engine compartment. Sight glass down here for the fuel tank, fuel filter. And sorry, one of the handrails is a little bit loose here. I'll have to put that back in its slot. Generally speaking, Athearn does a fantastic job representing the prototype models. This is a turbocharged EMD diesel unit, a 16-cylinder. It's I believe a 645 prime mover. Let me confirm that. Yes, a 645 prime mover, 16-cylinder turbocharged. You can see up here. Here's the turbo exhaust. Again, just beautiful model, beautiful paint, sort of the matte black. That was the Illinois Central staple in the 1990s when it reverted back from the Illinois Central Gulf back to Illinois Central. They went to this all black, sort of in homage to their original paint scheme, the black with the green diamond. One thing on the newer 3140, or what you would see today prototypically, the original conspicuity marks on this locomotive are white, and that is prototypically correct for when it was built back in the late 90s. Today they have replaced the white stripe with a yellow stripe just for more visibility, especially a black locomotive at night, with putting that yellow reflective conspicuity mark on just adds a little bit more to the safety of the general public, because the general public does not respect trains and grade crossings as much as they probably should. And again, just a very, very beautiful, beautiful representation of the GP40-3. Okay, you can see I have my JMRI up and running. I'm going to click on New Locomotive up here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read the type from the decoder. And you can see down here it's reading CV8 and CV7. It's going to give me a couple different choices here. It's still reading, so good, bad, or otherwise. And I've had this happen to me before. So this is a Tsunami 2 diesel, an OEM, so it's a manufacturer for specific manufacturer, and this is for the Athearn Genesis model. And if you really start looking through here, these are all the possibilities that the decoder could be. Certainly that's a GP50 is not a choice, so the closest thing that we have here really is going to be one of the GP40-2s. I'm going to select the GP40-2 with the ditch lights. I'm going to create a new locomotive roster here, roster entry, and it opened up I double clicked too fast and it opened up the comprehensive programmer for me. So I'm going to go ahead and quick enter this in here. Locomotive is 3140, road name is Illinois Central, the road number is 3140, manufacturer is Athearn, model, this is a GP40-3, and I'm going to leave the rest of this. I'm going to go ahead and save this to my roster, and now I'm actually going to, before I make any changes, I'm actually going to read all of the sheets, and I'm going to turn the camera off while it does this, simply because it takes a while to read all the sheets. So it's going to read all of the factory defaults. So even though that there wasn't a GP50 actually in the JMRI selection, by reading all sheets, it's going to pull all the defaults in off of this decoder. So I'm going to go ahead and do this, and when it's done, I'll get to the changes I'm going to make. Okay, it's read all the sheets, so now I know that what I'm working with here. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the long address, or the DCC decoder address, from its default value of 3. We're going to change this to the number of the locomotive, which is 3140. And I'm going to go ahead and write the changes. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the sound levels tab. I usually crank these way down simply because for the room I'm in, the default is just way too loud. So I'm going to go ahead and write the changes on the sheet. Next thing I'm going to do is, there's a couple things we can take a look at. Function map, you can see headlight, backup lights, F0 and well, both default to F0. Ditch lights, function 5 and function 6, those are both set to F5. Independent train brakes, F11, which we like. So I'm not going to make any changes on here. All the changes I'm going to make are on the CV level, or the CV tab. So a couple things that we're going to do here first. The braking value, or the braking on the Athearn Genesis Tsunami 2 decoders actually comes default set to be off, so we have to enable the independent train brake. So to do that, if you follow along with the instructions in your manual, or if you just remember how to do this, we actually have to change CV 1.403, one of the indexed CVs 1.403. So we'll just go ahead and scroll way down here. So right now 1.403 is set to a value of 12. We're going to change this to 0, and I'm going to write those changes. So that basically sets the default of the sound and allows us to enable CV117, which is the independent train brake. So I'm going to scroll way back up to 117. This is disabled or set to off. Any values between 1 and 127 are added to CV value of 4. Any values 129 or above are subtracted. So this one I'm going to set this like I have it to the others, Tsunami 2 diesels that I have. 150 works for me. And it gives me a little bit shorter braking distance, simply from the standpoint that that's something that I want with my locomotives, because it just gives me the opportunity to slow them down and stop them quickly. Might not be prototypically correct, but it's for my layout and what I like, it's what I end up doing. The rest of these I'm just going to go through and set, and this is going to be optimized for my proto throttle. These are identical values to the other locomotives that I have that are Tsunami 2 decoders. So function 3 is going to be 200. Function 4, which is the momentum, change that to 255. CV31 is not listed here. This gets changing CV31 if you're using your hand throttle, lets you get into the index menu. Don't have to worry about that here. So I'm going to get down here. 1.257 and 258 are set to values of 0. I'm going to leave 1.257 because that's the headlight. I'm going to leave that at 0. 1.258, I'm going to change that to 19, which is on the side. 259 and 260 I'm going to leave alone. 261 I'm going to leave as a value of 5. 262 I'm going to change this to a value of 6. So I'm going to write 258, write 262. I'm going to go back up and change the directionality of the ditch lights on 57 and 58. Actually, this is for the headlights and the ditch lights. So we're going to change 57 and 58 both to values of 63. Okay. Right now, those are the only changes I'm going to make on this particular locomotive. It should be optimized for my proto throttle, so let's go ahead and take it for a test spin. Real quick edit, sorry about that, guys. 1.250, I was looking at some old notes that I'd taken the first time I programmed my locomotive. 1.259 needs to be 5. 1.260 needs to be 5. 1.261 needs to be 6. And 1.262 needs to be 6. I did a real quick test, and what ended up happening was the ditch lights were not set correctly. Only one was coming on, so this will fix that. So I apologize, I should have grabbed the notes that I thought I was grabbing.